monetary policy in the advanced economies. For many years, we thought that the quantitative easing would be prolonged, but of course, we are paying the price that heavy liquidity in the market since or after the global financial crisis, we are paying for this. And that's why you find that the US continue to tighten monetary policy. In fact, even now, as of 2 days ago, we were discussing and everybody argued, and including in the US Secretary to the Treasury, told us about 3 weeks ago that their core inflation is still high. If core inflation is still high, it means that their interest structure will continue to be high. Ours is not core inflation, which is high. Ours is the inflation that is coming from food and fuel effects, which is transmitted to us because we are importing a lot of food. There's a scarcity value. Fuel prices are rising. And of course, it's also exacerbated by the nominal exchange rate movements because domestic traded prices will mimic the movements in the exchange rate. Now, we rely very much on the imported fuel. So it means that there is very little we can do about that. It's only try to innovate around it. And of course, I've listened to some comments about the G2G. I think my colleague here will come back to say most of the African countries are asking us, how are you doing it? Because you have managed to actually run away from the two effects that we were salvaging ourselves. One of them is because of the dollar depreciation effect. Initially, we have said that it is coming from the US effect, but I'm going to argue later to show that we are paying for the past policy mistakes. Let's not hide. Somebody said we are Kenyans. We live in Kenya. We should own up the mistakes so that we don't repeat them again. So the biggest impact right now from on the nominal exchange rate is actually our own past mistake. But because my colleague here may come back to talk about the G2G, it is if we continued without the G2G, it would not have worked. Things could have been quite devastating. Uganda, as just my friend Bero has mentioned, they are trying to run what we're doing because they think they can do it better. But so many handwinds. Tanzania was coming to run from us. They couldn't manage because one of the things is that the domestic market must be efficient. We have a domestic market in terms of fuel and even palm prices that is efficient. What we wanted to support it is how do you source the dollars? Can we have a deferred LC? Trade finance is risk-free. We argued for other people, even including by IMF, for about 6 months about how trade finance works. It's risk-free. We have to move to situations where we have to go into structured finance for us to be innovative to solve ourselves from the current crisis, current problems that we are facing. Now, what policy mistakes have contributed to this outcome of high cost of living? Mr. Co-chairs, the rising cost of living in the country is also as a result of an ineffective and also inadequate policy intervention that resulted in aggravating the already dire situation. And some of these interventions include subsidizing consumption of goods instead of production to respond to the rising costs of living. And fuel subsidies alone itself was so heavy, it was not very sustainable. And we do agree, it has nothing to do with the political positioning here. It's a whole issue of seeing what is the magnitude and where could we have gone with it. And this was because the consumption basket of fuel for the people, actually, one of the realities is that we were not subsidizing the poor by fuel subsidy. We were actually subsidizing everybody else, but not the poor. And this is because in the consumption basket, if you open it up, you'll see that the fuel for people at the bottom of the pyramid is marginal compared to those to the middle and upper income groups. The second subsidy was on maize flour, and the whole issue is who benefited, because there were only a few benefits because Only a few manufacturers were able to access the market through using that subsidized maize flour. So many things have been written on this, but the most important thing is that it did not reach out. Now, investments in enhancing agricultural productivity are hampered by gaps in food supply chain that contribute to import dependency and even post-harvest losses. And this is a point that Biro Keros mentioned, that I'm a person who is fond of market. This is where market failure has actually pushed us the wrong way. When markets don't function, in a sense, what you're really saying is that production will fail downstream. So it is no magic, because you are not going to produce if the market is not going to give you the returns. It is no magic also that if you cannot appropriate returns from your own investment, then you cannot invest. That's why we have a secular decline of the manufacturing sector. What Hinga is trying to do here is, why he's saying we need interventions. On one of the interventions is housing, for us to revive the manufacturing sector. Let's be Kenyans. Let's accept our mistakes. There is no way you're going to find people producing food if you cannot sell the food. You cannot sell maize. You cannot sell your rice. You cannot produce. When markets are functioning, then you know that upstream, downstream, you increase production and productivity. Then when you are there, and Kenyans, we are known for smallholder production. Upstream, you're observing higher incomes. That gate, that bridge that we have destroyed, that somebody has captured the market, then it means that you cannot produce food at the appropriate time. And I remember, Your Excellency, we moved, remember our discussion on production, transport, processing and transportation. That will facilitate storage. There's nothing with the current technology that we cannot store. So essentially, we could have benefiting from other periods that we could have done very well. Kenya, like many other countries, are also experiencing foreign exchange challenges due to the rise in US interest rates. And this is compounded by misaligned exchange rate and the adoption of managed exchange rate system. In the last 6 years, we have actually said, actually in the last 7 years, so we can actually say the system led to a collapse of the interbank, because you want to manage the two-way exchange and restrict how much it can. Then in the process, the interbank collapsed. Now, at the same time, Your Excellencies, let me say also, the government was heavily investing in infrastructure projects and other mega projects, even expressway. What is the effect? The effect of that investment is actually to bid the prices of non-tradable prices up. Okay? The non-tradable prices start rising because of that heavy investment. Because of that, if you wanted to compute the real exchange rate, because we need to look at real figures here, it is the reciprocal of the non-tradable prices. But that is too complex. Let me reduce it a little. If the non-tradable prices are reflecting the real exchange rate, what should happen is that the nominal exchange rate must move to equilibrate the situation. Otherwise, the whole economy will be at a disequilibrium. That is why the nominal exchange rate is the automatic stabilizer. I emphasized this in 2010, 2011. I think my friend here, he remembers, you remember that I argued that don't control the nominal exchange rate because it's the automatic stabilizer. It's the nationwide relative price. So the moment we control that, then it means that the non-tradable prices will push misalignment. Even the IMF and the World Bank mentioned some years back that the exchange rate was misaligned. That's also what the governor of the central bank a few weeks back actually said. It's a statement of fact that that was true. So what has happened? It is the process of adjustment. then the automatic stabilizer must move so that it equilibrates the whole thing. We are paying for past mistakes, and that is where we are. So, because we created a distortion, that distortion can only be corrected by movement of the relative price. And that means that we reprice so many things we suffer. We suffer because even the nominal debt is actually ballooned because of the pure effect. In fact, our computation with some of the people who are showing me some data, they were showing that actually, even if you didn't borrow a cent, our external debt would have increased by 24%. Just imagine that sheer impact. Of course, we cannot now, we have to do a lot of work to disentangle what happened because of the US on the developed world tightening their monetary policy and rising interest rates, and what happens to the others. But we can even show some numbers. For example, the current supplementary one shows that the deficit has increased by almost 0.9%. 0.9%. This is purely interest rate cost on debt. And that's why we have moved from our target 4.2% of GDP to about.
That would be how much in absolute figures?
It's about 145 billion. 145 billion shillings, absolute figure.
That 0.9 or 9%?
0.9.
0.9.
0.9%.
0.9 and equivalent of 145 billion.
Yes.
On account of exchange.
On account of just interest rate, the exchange rate movement and interest rate cost. You can imagine how much we are exposed. It is a policy choice that we make that we have to have a floating exchange rate, but it's also a policy choice that we make. We sustain that policy space. It's a policy that is good for everyone, but we have to make sure that we don't control it for our benefit, because in the short term it may look nice, but in the long term we have to pay the price.
Said you moved from 4.2 as a
I still think that we should allow Prof.
Yeah, that's why I'm trying to continue on the topic. He said we moved from
We have moved from about 4.4 it was about 4.4 to add 0.9 is giving us like 5.4. We are still trying to see how much we can cut. That's why the supplementary, to make sure that we remain at 5.2% fiscal deficit. I know somebody talked about fiscal deficit, but even the example that was given by Biro Kero said we had moved to 9.9% in terms of deficit. Now, 9% accumulation of deficit, it means that you are working like there are no budget constraints. Abraham was talking about that. We used to model behavior, and the first thing is to say there is no Ponzi game. This in Kenya we talk about the pyramid. When we model government behavior, we start by saying there are budget constraints, no Ponzi games, or there because you cannot have unlimited borrowing. You have to have. But now, when we moved from about what did you say, Biro? From is it 4% to about 4.2% to about 9%, you can see that something has to give way. Anyway, I'll come back to that a little bit. Second, of course, when the new exchange rate is misaligned, it affects everything else. It affects the performance in terms of our manufacturing sector. It affects the performance of our trade sector, and you find us in current account deficit is rising. So then again, nominal exchange rate must depreciate to equilibrate the process. You find that FDI, that is foreign direct investment, is not coming into the market. In fact, I was looking at the data from 2021, 2022, it was zero. So this outcome, it implies that for the economy to return back to stability and it means that the nominal exchange rate has to adjust and it depreciates so fast. But I cannot call it a free fall. That is not a good. There is a policy. It cannot be a free fall. It is actually adjusting to the magnitude of misalignment. Fourth, we do know that we also have to tighten monetary policy because you are faced by supply side shocks and you are faced by scarcity value, and you have to mimic also what is happening to the other world, like the US. In fact, when this tightening in the US began, you realize that most of the people are caught off guard, including even the European Central Bank. They did not react until the second tightening of the US. So by the time they were tightening, was tightening, the dollar was already stronger than actually the euro. So essentially, they noticed their own problems in terms of domestic inflation much earlier. Finally, there is no way in our current policy of exchange rate that domestic prices will not mimic the exchange rate movements. It also tells us that in future we cannot make those mistakes. It also means that in future we can observe our competitiveness by making sure that we do not impose controls. In fact, wherever I went, I was asked, Kenya has imposed exchange controls. I said, no, we have no capital controls and we have no exchange controls. Look, we have been looking at the data, for example, the East African currencies and Kenyan currency. And we realized that all of a sudden, other currencies started depreciating against the Kenya shilling. Why? Because there was at one time, the Kenya shilling was overruled in terms of trading in the East Africa. Remember, it was the preferred currency at the cross border, at the border places. But because we changed into the new designs, instead of having a seamless translation, we canceled all the MOUs with other central banks. It became a foreign currency. Nobody was trading with it. And because you cherry pick which notes should it be, nobody was sure. Traders are never sure. They never follow the newspapers. They follow instinct. So if you look at from that period, from 2018, 2019, all of a sudden, all the East African currencies are strengthening against the Kenya shilling. I am calling them policy mistakes, Your Excellencies, is because that is where we are. It's an institutional failure problem that we have to come and remember that let's reverse it. We should not heap blame on anyone, but there is an institutional failure problem. Let me go to more government measures to reduce cost of living. And the first thing is when the Kenya Kwanza government began the journey for bringing down the cost of living and improving livelihoods, while at the same time trying to foster sustainable, inclusive economic transformation through implementation of bottom-up economic transformation agenda, we had several issues to take up. One is to recognize that at the totality of the problems that we are facing, it's a development discourse, it's a development agenda. I heard Abraham saying that we should cut spending, but you cannot wake up and cut spending. Because if you needed to cut spending and to the limit where it also fits your budget, you have maybe to have the population in school, teaching or whatever, everywhere, because they are recurrent costs and we cannot just trim them at a go. We have to understand the realities. And one of them is to make sure that we have some interventions that do not require massive resources. Interventions can create a multiplier effect. One of them was the Hustler Fund. I didn't understand what my friend Vero Kero said. He said it is 300%. I borrow the Hustler Fund to make sure that my credit scores are improved. I borrow and maybe after 3 weeks I pay back, and I observe how much the pro rata in terms of how much you pay back. So I can talk about it. I borrow, I see, and want to see how much people are borrowing. In fact, we get data of who is reading in terms of how many times. In fact, we have said the next phase is we want to visit those people everywhere in Kenya and see what kind of business they are doing. This is an intervention. The housing project is an intervention because we cannot revitalize or revive our manufacturing sector without very strategic and targeted interventions. Because where we are, we have come down so hard. And I really sympathize with the situation that 22 million of Kenyans are below the poverty line. The debate is not how it is measured. The debate that's the truth. Poverty has hit us. One of my previous works that of course I would have started with it is to show that strong growth will reduce poverty significantly. But once it is supplemented by targeted social interventions, transfers, it is going to flatten inequality. But the whole issue is that everything that in that statement requires money, isn't it? It requires money. So let's not chase our shadows. The first thing to do, because we don't have enough money. For example, somebody talked about during the COVID. I provided a study where we did using data from phones. By the mere fact of shutdown plus targeted social transfers, we reduced our transmission rate of COVID by 9%. But you cannot continue the transfers the way we were continuing. So, in a sense, everything that we want to do requires money. So that's why I'm saying strategic interventions are very, very important. Hasrafad was one of them. The housing, the affordable housing is another. There are so many that are in the pipeline. But let me focus on special focus on how we are going to increase employment and even create a more equitable distribution of income and social security because of the availability of, for example, affordable goods, affordable houses. We are likely to increase employment in a big way, and that can create its own momentum. But at the end of the day, we are looking at our tax rate or our taxes, not because they are tax rates. We are looking at, we cannot even afford to use the tax rates to actually finance what we really have. But what we have done with my team at the Treasury and the KRA is to ask, how can we increase the tax base? At the end of the day, it's the tax base. During the Africa Climate Summit, we actually said we need to go into natural resource accounting because there are resources that are not brought to our GDP, and we can actually again improve on that. When Hinga was talking, I was also trying to check even our economic survey to see when you're parading the GDP data, the first component is ownership of dwellings, isn't it? That is, so increasing affordable housing, we are actually increasing the base, the GDP. All these measures are what is required in the development discourse. Mr. Chairman and co-chairs, the government has taken a long-term sustainable approach of subsidizing production of goods instead of consumption to respond to rising cost of living. And through this, for example, the voucher, the provision of fertilizer through the vouchers, e-voucher fertilizer subsidy, this is extremely important, and I can give you the numbers. About 6 million bags of 50 kg bags of subsidized fertilizer were provided, worth Kenya shillings 15 billion. And they were retailing at a cost of 3,500 per bag. And this is a major reduction from the Kenya shillings, from the retail price of 6,500 per bag. So it represented a subsidy of 3,000 per bag, 3,000 shillings per bag. The most important thing is that this fertilizer was provided to it was specific to the regions. And that is why it has delivered a bumper harvest. And that is what we are expecting. That's why we are all fighting to make sure that the post-harvest losses are minimized this time round. The second was the guaranteed duty waiver on importation of key food products such as white maize, rice, yellow maize, soybeans. And this was again to add, and there are combination of so many assorted proteins, concentrate, feed additives, that was effective from 1st February and to 6th August 2023. And this was to allow us to bridge food stocks deficit, as well as lower and stabilize food prices, and even animal feeds that were also suffering quite devastatingly. So you can imagine that those are very, very important interventions. The second intervention, co-chairs, honorable members, was the macroeconomic stability by ensuring that inflation remains within its target range. And the policy range is very, very important for us because it means that it anchors inflation expectations, and adequate monetary policy interventions were made. Inflation, for example, Monetary Policy Committee gradually raised the policy rate, the CBR, the central bank rate, from 7.50% in May 2022 to 10.50 in June 2026. And it has been retained at 10.5 in August. And consequently, we have seen inflation coming down from about 9% to about 7% in August, 6.8 in September. So it's flattening, and about 6.9 in October. So it is actually flattening around 6.9. And this is from a peak of 9.6% in October 2026, 2022. And you can see that this is very, very important. If the inflation remains below 7%,